Don't park your spirit. Find the path beyond harmony.
We are so powerful as beings. Nothing can tell you your path except for you. Once you start on this path, you can't turn around. Don't park your spirit there. You did it. You chose it. That's what you wanted. Because every choice you make affects your life. If you believe it, things are going to work for you because they parked their spirit. Wherever you go, there you are. When we start to understand spirituality and you look back at your life, you realize the different things you manifested when you didn't even have a clue you were manifesting. For instance, when I was young, moved out of the house, didn't really have any role models growing up, so I really wasn't sure how to do the adulting thing. So I got jobs. I mean, actually, any job that I wanted, I got. And I didn't realize that it should be hard to do. If there was something that I saw that looked really good, it was that shiny object, I would go in there and I, beyond a shadow of a doubt, knew it's mine. And every single time it was, which tells you how many jobs I've gone through in my lifetime. Quite a few. But the big one, I was spiraling downhill. I was in my 20s. I had friends. I had stuff to do, kind of, not really. But boy, let me tell you, we were learning how to party. We were hanging out. We were staying up late. We were smoking pot. We were drinking, was dabbling in, well, I couldn't afford anything but crank and some cocaine. I didn't do any of the big heavy drugs, but it didn't matter. I just wallowed in what everybody else was doing. I was just following along. In the meantime, in my head, I just kept thinking, I'm going to die. I had a death wish. I didn't care if I lived or died. I didn't know what the purpose was. Looking at my childhood, like in my mother's life, like, well, there's not a whole lot of good stuff that happens here. So I visualized and fantasized about a knight in shining armor coming and sweeping me up and taking me away. It's all I wanted. I thought about it. I dreamt about it. I knew it couldn't happen until my ex-fiance out of the blue finds me and he calls me, and he was in my soul group, and to this day he still is. We're thick as thieves, like one of my best friends ever. But he called me, and his 10-year class reunion was coming up, and he said, come to Boston, come be my date for my class reunion. As good as that sounded, I was in the middle of a relationship with a very scary man. A man that was kind of he was emotionally abusive. Admit it. Okay, I did. He was emotionally abusive, and I was kind of taken care of by him a little bit, and I owed him, I guess. So I was like, no, I can't leave. And he said, Carrie, you need to go. Get to the airport right now. There will be a ticket waiting for you. I'm like, I can't. Everything about me was like, no. Remember the guidance thing? It was like, go, but it felt icky to stay. But I'm like, no, I have to stay and do the icky. Yeah, no. So he talked, and then finally I'm like, all right, I'm going to the airport. So he said, just grab a few things that you need. We'll get you everything you need when you get here. So I did. I grabbed my toiletries, put on my little red dress, and off I went to the airport. Scared to death that I was going to run into this guy that I was scared to death of. I'm at the airport, waiting, nervous. Finally, I get to get on the airplane. I get on the plane. I'm in the 6th row. I'm at the window seat. Now I can relax. I know that he's not going to walk down the aisle. He's not going back east or to Chicago, where I was going to connect. So I was sitting there, just like, I will deal with him when I get back. Just gave it up to God. Like, I don't care. I'm just here. And then the people who were sitting next to me joined me, who were big, 2 large people who just wanted to go to sleep. So I'm like, I don't care. I'm here. I'm going to Chicago. It was Connection in Chicago. So I was looking out the window, and then they announced that the final passengers, we had some delayed passengers, were coming in, and then they were going to close the overhead doors. Just as the final person walks in, I turn my head, and the man that is there walking down the aisle, it was as if somebody threw a bowling ball smack into my stomach, because I was like, oh my God, I'm going to marry that man. I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt the man who just walked on the plane was going to be my husband. I had no idea how I knew that. All I knew was I had to meet him, because it's really hard for somebody to marry you if they haven't met you yet. So I think, all right, I got to meet this guy. So I called the flight attendant and I said, can I move to another seat? Because I wasn't getting out of my seat. And she said, I'm sorry, ma'am. The flight is completely full. It's sold out. You're going to have to stay there. After we were airborne, I thought, I got to get down the aisle. I asked the people who were sleeping if they could let me out to go down the hall to the little girl's room. And I didn't see any open seats. On my way back up the aisle, directly across the aisle from the man that was going to be my husband was an empty seat. I went back to the back of the aircraft, waiting to see if somebody was going to go to the seat, and nobody came out of the bathrooms. So I went back to the flight attendants and I said, that seat right there, can I sit there? They looked at each other like they lost somebody. They were going through all their paperwork and they're like, he must have flushed himself. They said, okay, take that seat. So there I sat and my husband-to-be was sleeping. Had to think quickly there. So as the beverage cart made its way by, I elbowed him as hard as I could, woke him up, and I'm like, oh, the cart, He's like, oh, I know, the cart. And we started chatting. He had a pack of cigarettes in his pocket, and I happened to be a smoker stuck in non-smoking in an airplane. Like there's a non-smoking section in an airplane. Anybody who was alive during those days, you know what I'm talking about. The fact that we did that was disgusting. So we went back and we had a cigarette, we had a cocktail, we were chatting. And then when we got to Chicago, where we were both connecting, we both had, I think, 2.5 hours. He asked if I wanted to have a drink at this bar into the runway. I'm like, sure. So I did. I went with him. We had a drink. We exchanged information. And off I went to Boston, and off he went to Ohio. 2.5 years later, I was in Ohio as his wife. We got married. And I did find out, once I got there, that wherever you go, there you are. Yep. Life with him wasn't wonderful by any means, but I found my knight in shining armor, and he got me the hell out of Las Vegas where I needed to go. Life with him was absolute, well, I painted this picture that it was wonderful, but it was absolute misery. I didn't have to work. No, I wasn't allowed to work because he just knew that if I worked where there were men, clearly I would sleep with them because, us women, we can't control ourselves. And all men want it, and clearly I would have no say, so I would just do it. This is how this man thought. So life with him was not pleasant, to say the least, and he had 2 children who were the children from hell. He never said no to these kids, ever, because he felt guilt over his divorce. I got to be a step monster to these children who had no rules, no responsibilities. It was literally a life of hell. When it started getting so bad, I was crying myself to sleep every single night. This man, because he was so worried about other men and me, he started lifting weights, and he went from 135 pounds to well over 200 pounds just by lifting weights, just so if anybody came up and looked at me, he's going to punch him. Yeah, that really felt good to me. And he smoked 3 packs a day. That was the best part. Bodybuilder was smoking. My life was miserable. So what I did, my mother got a gun when her life got bad. I went to a store that I'd never been to before. They have bookstores. Did you know that? Bookstores. And in this bookstore, I found a self-help section. I found 2 books, and I took those 2 books home. And at night, when he was pumping iron in the basement, clanking the weights, I was reading my books. I was hiding reading my books. And with each page I turned of these books, I felt a little stronger. I felt a little more empowered. And I finally knew that I wasn't the only one that had a really bad childhood and that you can turn your life around. These self-help books just started me on this journey. They just started me on a journey of living and deciding that I deserve something better. It was reading those 2 books that gave me the power to draw that line in the sand. So when he threatened me with divorce that final time, I knew I was gone. From that point on, it took me probably 5 years to dig myself out of the hellhole of still wanting to go back to him, because that was where my comfort was. My comfort was being taken care of, being in a relationship where somebody is protecting me and taking care of me. Of course, with threats and no physical abuse, but emotional abuse. He would get right in my face and tell me what my rules were. Yeah, that was a life said no one ever. It took a long time for the divorce to go through, and it took about 5 years before I got to the point to where if I thought he would knock on my door, I would want to jump into his arms. Because when that's all you know is dysfunction and abuse, that is your comfort level. You're not comfortable just striking out on your own, being all Joe independent, thinking you got the world, because you don't know how to do it. After I left him, I felt strong and empowered, but yet I was still a victim. I was also a victim of him. I was a victim from him, his children. All of this I created made me a victim. During our marriage, we went to tough love meetings for his son twice. He knew he needed it, but he said out loud, I can't let my son not love me, which, believe me, they're paying a huge price for that now. This man needed to give his kids some boundaries, but he didn't. But I happened to meet this man who was the tough love counselor, who ended up being the one I would go see as a counselor, who would help me step away from what happened to me. Within 6 months, I went to this man. I saw him for one-on-one counseling, and I also joined a group that met once a week, sat on the couches together and talked. I sat down around the couches with everybody, and Jerry, who was the counselor, he walks around the room with these pages, and he says, I want you to list every single thing you resent. So I'm like, give me the whole tablet. I need them all. So he gave me a big old stack. I went home and I wrote down, my mom did this guy did this. I had so many resentments oozing out of my pores. My husband at the time, his son, everything. I was like so happy to do this. So I listed all these resentments, and I saw this man for 6 months. He also put me in a private female group for sexual abuse victims, which I went in there and I processed and let go of my sexual abuse trauma. But in this group, I sat there for 6 months. He gave us tons of meditations, Bernie Siegel, Ernie Larson, Inner Child. I did all of the work. For 6 months, I cried every night by letting all of this stuff come forward and putting it on paper. The best part was, it was 6 months after I started going to him. I sat down on the couch in the group counseling session with the same faces I'd seen for 6 months, and they'd been there long before I got there. As he was walking around the room, handing out the sheets for who do you resent, he came up to me and we both kind of smiled at each other, because he knew darn good and well I didn't need any more. I no longer held resentments. He used a great analogy. You're in a school bus. All of these people were in my bus, and they were all driving my bus. As far as I was concerned, I was in the back row. I was like next to the emergency exit. They had bars over because I couldn't get out. I was so far in the back of my own bus, I was nowhere near the steering wheel. What I had done over this time is I kicked every single one of these people off my bus, and I moved to the very front, and I was now the sole driver of my bus. No longer was anybody else going to pull the strings on how my life was to go. I still had a lot of work ahead of me. I was super strong. I was independent, but I was still a broken child inside. I still had, my comfort zone had been challenged. I knew I needed to advance and keep moving. I just didn't know what was going to be next for me. But it didn't matter, because I moved beyond that relationship. I moved beyond my childhood. And not long after that, all of the sting of all of the horrible memories of what had happened to us as children, it was gone. There was no sting left. Walking away, getting through your stories is the biggest thing you have to do. You are manifesting all the time. I manifested this man who was in my soul group. He was there to help me. Even though he needed a lot of help, he definitely didn't advance in this lifetime. But I did. I moved beyond him. And beyond that, I moved beyond the next and beyond. And my beyond continues on. And that's why I'm sharing these stories. I'm going to be all over the place with my stories. They're going to be current. They're going to be old news. But I just know I have so much to share. It's been far too long inside, and it's time for me to let it all out. Until next time, I'll see you later. See ya. Bye.